Okay, so I was trying to decide, in Parshat Bamidbar and Parshat Naso, you're trying to decide what can you dig up to talk about in Hayafta, in these parshiot, because there is not a whole lot which is exciting. And we were blessed that they coincided with Yom Yerushalayim and with Shavuot, and with Lag BaOmer, so we had what to talk about. But in Parshat Behalotcha, you're spoiled for choice. There is so much to talk about in this parsha that it's very, very hard to decide what am I going to start from, what am I going to expand on, what am I going to leave out. So I decided that I was going to use the very end of the parasha to talk about a story which is related, not very well known, has in the last year has been a little bit in the news, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the story of Miriam and Moshe and Aaron at the end of the parasha, and the character of Miriam, and the character of Queen Helene of Chadaiv, of Adiabin, and see how see similar. There are lots of connections. Okay, just trust me. There are lots of connections. So that's where we're going this week. We're going to start off with oh, Aliza, yeah, can you put up your screen sharing, Aliza, or I'm screen sharing? Share screen.
If you're able to, it's preferable. If you have a problem, let me know and I will. This way you can point to where you're up to on the screen, you can scroll down.
Yeah, exactly.
It's best if you're able to.
1 minute. Yeah, okay. 1 minute, come back too soon. No, okay, I've just lost us. Cancel. No, Aliza, I can't make it work. Oh, yes, I can. Okay, done it. Okay, this week's parsha begins with the story with a what seems to be an almost unrelated item, and I just want to put it there on our table before we start because it's going to connect in for us. וידבר השם אל משה לאמור, דבר לאהרון ואמרת אליו בהעלותך את הנרות אל מול פני המנורה יאירו שבעת הנרות. Right, the very famous opening of Parshat Behalotcha is about the menorah in the Mishkan, telling Aaron that it's his job every day to go into the Mishkan, stand before the menorah, and light it. ויעש כן אהרון אל מול פני המנורה, העלה נרותיה כאשר ציווה אדוני את משה. And that's what Aaron does every day. וזה מעשה המנורה. And this is what the menorah looked like. מקשה זהב עד ירחה, it was a beaten gold from its stem ad pircha, in other words, from the middle column to the very last of its ornamental flowers, mikshahi, all one beaten out piece of gold, כמראה אשר הראה השם את משה, כן עשה את המנורה. As God showed Moshe in a vision, so he made the menorah. And Rashi explains this last comment in the pasuk that Moshe couldn't understand. How do you make something so complicated with so many different pieces out of one piece of solid gold? And in order to understand, God had to show him a schematic diagram, a mar'eh, of what the menorah was supposed to look like. So I just want us to bear in mind that our parsha begins with a candelabra, with the menorah of the Mishkan, and how beautiful and complex and golden it was. Okay, so we're just putting that on the side. Now come and look at the end of the parasha. Perek Yud Bet, and we're just going to read the whole perek. ותדבר מרים ואהרון במשה על אודות האישה הכושית אשר לקח. Miriam and Aaron spoke of Moshe concerning the Cushite woman whom he'd married. כי אישה כושית לקח, because his wife was a Cushite woman. ויאמרו, הרק אך במשה דיבר השם, הלא גם בנו דיבר? And they said, is Moshe the only prophet in town? Doesn't God speak also to us? Vayishma Hashem, and God heard them. Before we read the reaction and where this comment of Miriam and Aharon takes us, let's just bear in mind that they are talking about Moshe being married to, the Mefarshim disagree whether this is talking about Zipporah as a member of a different nation to the rest of Am Yisrael, or whether it's talking about another wife, and that there are enspo, a whole slew of midrashim about Moshe's life between when he left Egypt and when he arrived in Midian and encountered the family of Yitro. Some of those midrashim appear in Philo, in Philon Alexandroni, and they talk about how Moshe wandered all over Africa and saved the kingdom of Cush and married the queen of the country and reigned over Ethiopia for many years before he eventually decided to continue on his journey and ended up in Midian. So all of those midrashim are connected to this terse description of ki isha kushit lakach, as if to say, this woman is not his original wife, this is not Zipporah, this is somebody else, and maybe it's the Cushite queen who appears in those midrashim. A very enigmatic, problematic story. Generally speaking, we assume that they're talking about Zipporah, but it really is not, it doesn't make all that much difference for where we want to go. Definitely, there is an issue here that Moshe's wife is not an organic member of Am Yisrael. That's what they're pointing to. Ki isha kushit lakach is saying she's an outsider, she comes from somewhere else. That's something else I want to look at when we take this story into our second Gilgul. Va'ish Moshe anav me'od mikol ha'adam asher al pnei ha'adama. Moshe was the most humble of all humanity. Vayomer Hashem pitom el Moshe ve'el Aharon ve'el Miriam. God spoke suddenly to Aaron and Moshe and Miriam, and the Mefarshim say God caught all three of them off guard, and the only one who was prepared, who was in a state where he could respectably hear Dvar Hashem, was Moshe, because he'd separated from his family, separated from his wife, was living in a separate tent, whereas Moshe and Aharon, whereas Miriam and Aharon found themselves in embarrassing circumstances. God says to the three of them, "Tz'u shlochtechem el ohel moed, vayetz'u shloshtam." God calls them all to go out, all three of them to go out to the ohel moed, to the tent of meeting, and they all go out. Vayored Hashem ba'amud anan. God came down in the pillar of cloud, vayamod petach ha'ohel, and he stood, kivyachol. His presence appeared at the entrance to the tent. Vayikra Aharon u'Miriam, and he called out the names of Aaron and Miriam, vayetz'u shnehem, and the two of them stepped forward, one step away from Moshe. There's an element of shaming here, of reckoning. You have done something wrong, I'm calling you to account. Vayomer shimu na dvarai, and God said, listen to my words. Im yeh neviachem Hashem b'mar'eh elav be'etvada. If your prophets of God, I appear to them, I make myself known to them in a vision. B'chalom adaber bo, I speak to them in a dream. Lo chen avdi Moshe. Not so my servant Moses, b'chol beiti ne'eman hu, he is the most faithful of all my household. Peh el peh adaber bo, v'lo v'chidot, u'tmunat Hashem yabit. I speak to him mouth to mouth, face to face. He sees, and he doesn't, not through riddles. U'tmunat Hashem yabit, he sees my own image. U'madua lo yaretim ledaber be'avdi Moshe. Why were you not awed, afraid to speak, to make any kind of comment about my servant Moshe? Vayichar af Hashem bam vayelach. And God's anger was kindled against them, and he left. V'ha'anan sar me'al ha'ohel, and the cloud departed from over the tent. V'hinei Miriam mitzora'at kashaleg, and Miriam was stricken with leprosy, white as snow. Vayifen Aaron el Miriam, Aaron turned to Miriam, v'hinei mitzora'at, and was shocked to see that she was leprous. And the classic question is always, why is Miriam punished and not Aharon? And the answer calls the classic commentary of the Chafetz Chaim into question, right? The Chafetz Chaim in his book, which is called Chafetz Chaim, writes in the 19th century, writes about Hilchot Lashon Hara. And he tries to make it very clear to us there that the person who listens to Lashon Hara is just as bad as the person who speaks Lashon Hara. But here, as Miriam is the one who speaks, and Miriam is the one who is stricken, and Aaron is only the one who, in the same way that he hears her comment and says nothing, he sees and is shocked by and is pained by her condition. She is, after all, his sister, but he doesn't actually suffer the physical punishment. Vayomer Aaron el Moshe, and Aaron turns to Moshe and says, Bi Adoni, al na tashet alenu chatat asher no'alnu ve'asher chatanu. Aaron doesn't turn to God. He understands that the medium for him is Moshe, and he turns to Moshe and says, Oh my Lord, don't place our sin upon us, although we're guilty of it and although we've sinned. Al na tehi kemet, do not let her be like a corpse. Asher b'tzeito merechem imo, v'yeachel chatzi b'saro, or like a child born dead, an aborted child, v'yeachel chatzi b'saro, with half of its flesh eaten away. Vayitzak Moshe Hashem lemor, And Moshe cries out to God and pens the shortest prayer that any of us have ever heard. And we look at these 5 words, and we look at our Siddur, and we say, why can't we be like that? El na refa na la. God, please heal her. I love that. It's such a beautifully presented story. There are aspects of it that we're not going to go into right now. I'm not going to look at the character of Moshe's Nevuah as opposed to the character of other prophets. I just want to focus on Miriam and her mistake and the fact that she's forgiven. I haven't put on the sheet the next part of the parasha, the continuation of the perek, in which Am Yisrael are supposed to begin to move on, because after all, let's come out of here. Stop screen sharing. Stop share. Moving on. Am Yisrael is supposed to move on at this point, leave Har Sinai behind, begin their great march towards Eretz Yisrael, and there is something that's going to hold them up. What is that something? That's the fact that Miriam cannot move. And the choice is, do we begin our march to Eretz Yisrael, towards our destiny, leaving behind Miriam HaNevi'ah because of the words which have come out of her mouth, or do we wait for her to recover? And as you know, the Perek tells us that the people waited 7 days. For 7 days, Miriam was excluded from the camp, as all lepers were, if there were any other lepers in the camp. And it sounds to me, it seems like the whole concept of tzarat has only been described in this context of the Ohel Moed, in Sefer Vayikra, and very possibly Miriam is the first to be stricken with, to experience this kind of affliction, and she's placed outside the camp, and she waits 7 days, and after 7 days, the Kohen, right, who in Sefer Vayikra was told he is the one who has to examine and determine the status of the Mitzvah. So the Kohen is Aaron, and it's his job. And here you have a beautiful midah keneged midah. Aaron was only party to Miriam's comment, but he has to be he's part of the sin, and he has to be part of its solution. He has to be the one who declares whether she's fit to return to the camp or not. So after 7 days, Miriam is healed, and Am Yisrael are ready to continue in Parshat Beha'alotcha on their journey towards Eretz Yisrael. Okay, I want to take this story, the context of Miriam, and the fact that she discusses a foreign wife, and take it to look at the story of Helene Hamalka. So we're going to share screen again. Come to here. Okay, let's move down. Here we go. We did in fact have the continuation on the sheet. אביה ירק בפיה, בפניה הלא תיכלם 7 ימים, תיסגר 7 ימים מחוץ למחנה. Miriam is placed in quarantine outside the machane, ba'achar te'asef, and the people don't go without her. Ba'achar nas'u ha'am mechatzarot v'yichanu b'midbar paran. The journey of Am Yisrael begins in Midbar Paran. the place where I want to connect between these two personalities, Miriam and Hamalka, Helene Hamalka, is a Gemara in Masechet Ta'anit, which describes Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam as Parnasim Tovim. Meitivi Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shlosha Parnasim Tovim amdu li Yisrael. Am Yisrael had three great benefactors. Eluhem, and who were they? Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam. V'shalosh matanot tovot nitnu al yadam. And each of them gave a different gift. There were three gifts who were given through them. The Eluhen, and these are they. Be'el, the well of water, which is attributed to Miriam. Ve'anan, and the clouds of glory, which protected the people from the dangers of the wilderness. And the dangers of the wilderness, Anan, Uman, and the manna. Be'er b'zchut Miriam, Amud Anan b'zchut Aharon, Man b'zchut Moshe. So each one of them is associated with one of the gifts. Nistalek ha'be'er, Meta Miriam, Nistalek ha'be'er. When Miriam died, and that's next week's parsha, Parshat Chukat, Nistalek ha'be'er, the well of water disappeared. And the Gemara brings the pasuk from next week's parsha, Vatamat sham Miriam, uketiv batrei, and immediately after the parsha tells us that Miriam died, v'lo haya mayim la'ida, the people had no water. V'chazra b'zchut shnehen, but the water came back through the merit of Moshe and Aharon, and that's the part of Parshat Chukat, Be'er Chafaruha, which describes how Am Yisrael once again were given water after the spring of Miriam disappeared. Okay, so the elements that we're taking with us from the parasha are a respected, great female leader, the concept of Giyul, of somebody marrying into Am Yisrael and being accepted by Am Yisrael or not, and the gifts that were bestowed by Miriam on Am Yisrael. And I'm just going to drop you into the story of Helena of Chadaiv, and we're going to ask ourselves what the connections and what the parallels are. So just to set the scene, let's do stop share. We're going to look for a second at a PowerPoint, which this week I actually know where to find. A minute, where are we? No. Every time I try to do this, I lose it. Okay. Share screen again. Okay. So we're comparing Miriam HaNevi'ah and Helene Hamalka. Who was Helene? So we are placing ourselves at the end of the Second Temple period, after the kingdom of the Hashmonaim, after the reign of Herod, when the descendants of Herod, Agrippa and his children, rule in Yerushalayim. Wait, is it going to work? No. Okay. Second, הצגת שקופיות. Okay, now it should work. Okay, so first of all, let's see where this kingdom is. If we look at the map, I'm going to take us gallery view away. Okay. If you look at this map, which is from the 1st century, the 1st century, not the 1st century BCE, the 1st century. If we look very carefully, we will find Chadayev Adia Ben on this map. If you follow my arrow, you can see it's down here. This is an Armenian empire at the time. And we're basically somewhere in Iraq. Chadayev is not a very large kingdom. Where's this gone? Oh, sorry. Chadayev is not a very large kingdom, and it's a good distance away. You have to go all the way through Syria to come from Eretz Israel, from Judea, through Syria, and across basically what becomes the Persian Empire, or which had been the Persian Empire, to get to Chadayev. Okay, which is here. In this country, in the 1st century, there is a king named Monbaz who marries his sister, whose name is Helene. And the tradition of incestual marriage between monarchs is common in Egypt. It's common in in some of these countries also. And Josephus tells us about tells us the story. He was very interested in the. He seems to have had. Josephus seems to have access to the chronicle of this king of Chadayev, whose son was named Monbaz, and he includes the story in his Antiquities of the Jews. In the very last book, book 20 of Antiquities, and now we're going to look at that excerpt. Okay, we're going to stop sharing here. Stop share. And we're going to come back to our screen share again. Share screen. Wow, why does it work? Okay. Coming back to here. Okay. And this is an excerpt from Josephus. Don't look at what it says at the beginning because it's a spoiler. You know what? I skipped this. Okay. Before we look at Josephus, because I didn't bring you the first section of the story in Josephus. He tells how this king. Stop screen sharing for a bit. Monbaz has a vision at night and is told that the child who growing within the womb of his wife Helene is going to be the greatest king of Chadayev, and although he has other children, he decides that this child is going to reign after him. The child is born, he's named Izates, and the king sends him away to grow up in another kingdom to make sure that he's not, as everybody knows that this child is going to displace them as the heir to the king, he wants to make sure the child grows up safely. So he sends Izates away, and he grows up in the court of another monarch, and only comes back a little later on in life. While there, he encounters, in this other kingdom, the young Izates encounters a Jewish missionary. And this is a fascinating aspect of the first century, when about the same time that Christianity is beginning to spread, but Christianity is a very, very small phenomenon, and a much larger phenomenon at the same time is an interest among in the pagan world, especially in Rome, in Judaism. And many, many, many individuals, important individuals within the Roman Empire, not only take an interest in Judaism, but think seriously about converting to Judaism. And there is even a community in Tyre called Yir'ei Hashem, of non-Jews who take upon themselves the Shiv'a Mitzvot B'nai Noach and describe themselves as those who fear the Lord. And there are Jews who wander around spreading the word, spreading the teachings, because there's a tremendous thirst. People are intellectually sophisticated. They've gone beyond idol worship. They don't believe that the statues, which are part of the state religion of the Roman Empire, have really anything behind them. And they're looking for it. They're out there seeking truth. And Jews teaching Torah and the ideas, the concepts of Yahadut gain a very ready audience. And there is just one thing which stands in the way of a mass wave of conversion. And that one thing is Brit Milah. So Izates encounters one of these missionary Jews, whose name is Elazar, and he becomes immensely interested in Yahadut. At the same time, in his father's kingdom, there is another Jew, Hananiah, who has a following in Chadayith, and included in his following is the queen, is the wife of the king, the mother of Izates. And she too has become extremely interested in Yahadut and is flirting with the idea of accepting it wholesale. Then her husband dies. Monbaz dies, and his eldest son, whose name is also Monbaz, becomes the regent. And Helene sends to Izates, wherever he is, to come back, which is going to take a number of months, maybe even years. And in the meantime, his half-brother Monbaz rules the country. And Josephus tells us how, instead of pushing out his brother, Monbaz is a fair and kindly regent, and then when his brother arrives, he peacefully and happily hands over the reins of state. Okay. And then we come to the passage in Josephus, which I wanted to look at. So now we're going to screen share again. Oh, that works much better. So, as to Helena, the king's mother, when she saw that the affairs of Izates' kingdom were in peace, and that her son was a happy man, and admired among all men, and even among foreigners, by the means of God's providence over him, she had a mind to go to the city of Jerusalem in order to worship at the temple of God, which was so very famous among all men, and to offer her thanks offerings there. So she desired her son to give her leave to go thither, upon which he gave his consent to what she desired very willingly, and made great preparations for her dismission, and gave her a great deal of money. And she went down to the city of Jerusalem. Her son conducting her on her journey a great way. Now her coming was of great advantage to the people of Jerusalem, for whereas a famine did oppress them at that time, and many people died for want of what was necessary to procure food. Withal, Queen Helena sent some of her servants to Alexandria with money to buy a great quantity of corn, and others of them to Cyprus to bring a cargo of dried figs. And as soon as they were come back and had brought those provisions, which was done very quickly, she distributed food to those that were in want of it, and left a most excellent memorial behind her of this benefaction, which she bestowed on our whole nation. And when her son Izates was informed of this famine, he sent great sums of money to the principal men in Jerusalem. And that's the story in Josephus of how Helene was a patrona tova, right? If the Gemara talked about shlosha patronim tovim, 3 great benefactors of Am Yisrael, so in the same way that Aharon, Moshe, and Miriam were responsible for providing Am Yisrael with food, water, and protection in the Midbar, so Helene Ka'amalka turns up in Yerushalayim in the middle of a famine in the 1st century CE, arriving with a whole royal procession, a whole royal entourage, piles of money and riches, and she uses her money, she uses everything she has for the common good. She sends to Egypt, which is always the breadbasket of the Middle East, to bring grain. She sends to Cyprus to bring figs, and she provides food literally for the whole city of Yerushalayim and alleviates the famine. So that's the first story of Helene. Something else I didn't tell you is that Josephus tells us about a disagreement between Helene and her son Izates. Helene, as we can see, is behaving as almost as a full-fledged Jew. Right? She comes to Yerushalayim, she visits the temple. That means she has to do tefillah, she has to immerse in a mikvah. She's essentially gone through everything that's required for a woman to become a convert. Izates wants to take the big step of joining her, but for him, that involves Brit Milah. And Helene tells him, there is an argument between the two of them, and Helene says to him, no way, you can't take the risk of surgery at your age as the king of the kingdom, the ruler of the kingdom. If something happens to you, then there'll be chaos. You can't take the risk of performing Brit Milah. You have to remain uncircumcised. And there is a Gemara, not in Masechet Ta'anit, somewhere else, which, as an aside to this story, Josephus doesn't bring the end of the story. The Gemara says that in the end, Izates decided the Gemara sets a scene of Izates and a colleague, also a king, learning together, engaged together in Torah, and a Jew comes into the room and says, how can you learn it and not do it? And they immediately call the state a physician and have Brit Milah performed on the spot for the two of them. That's the way the Gemara finishes the story of Izates. And apparently he survives because the kingdom remains stable, and Helene is able to leave for Yerushalayim. Okay, now we are going to look at in the last 10 years, in the last 100 years and in the last 10 years, two sites in Yerushalayim have become associated with Helene Hamalka. The first is what's called the Tomb of the Kings, and we'll look at that in a little while. And the second is a palace excavated in the City of David excavation in Ir David, in the excavation of the Givati parking lot. And that is what we're going to look at right now. This works better. S. Okay. This is really annoying. Okay. Okay. This is a part of the Second Temple model from the Israel Museum. And what you can see, if we look, here's my arrow. If you look at my arrow, you can see that there is a valley with bridges over it. And by the side of the valley, there is a path. And all along the path are colonnaded buildings. This path, which is stepped, is the Tarapian Way. And that's the very exciting excavation that you can see in Ir David nowadays. It's way, way, way deep underneath the houses of Silwan today. But we can actually walk on these steps in Ir David and follow this path, which led from the Shiloach up until it finally reached the base of the Temple Mount, and then went up via the stairs of Wilson's Arch to Harabait. If you look to the right, to the south of the Tarapian Way, you can see enormous buildings. And one of these has been excavated in Ir David, which is around here, the Givati parking lot. And they have found what remains of presumably one of these buildings. And they would like to say, because both Josephus and Chazal tell us that Helene built a palace in Yerushalayim, they would like to suggest that the building that they have found could be the palace of Helene Amalka. Now it's a little bit, obviously, it's a little bit of a stretch, because there are more than one, there are many palaces here. But it's a very nice idea. If we look at the excavation, the Ir David excavation, see, here we go. This is the courtyard of the palace. And if we look a little bit further, there's a close-up, one way, sorry, of a mikveh which is built into the house. Not very easy to see here, but it fits very nicely into the stories of Helene Amalka settling in Yerushalayim and visiting the Mikdash and becoming a part of the scene in Yerushalayim. What is the next one? Okay. The Tosefta tells us of 3 gifts which Helene presented to the Mikdash. So this is the quote. Helene עשתה נברשת של זהב שעל פתח ההיכל. Helene made a golden light fitting for the entrance of the hall of the temple. And why did this reverberate with me? Just because we read at the beginning of the parasha about the menorah Miksha Zahav. So I'm just throwing it in there. So she presents, one of her first gift is an elaborate chandelier which hangs at the entrance to the Mikdash, lighting up the entrance. Af hi asta tavla shel zahav sheparashat sota ktuva aleha. Now this is connecting Helene to last week's parasha. She had a golden tablet made on which the verses describing the ceremony of the trial of the sota in which the name of God is written and then dissolved from the parchment into water, which is then given to the sotah to drink, or the parchment is burnt and the ashes are placed in the water for the sotah to drink. And in order to write the name of God on that parasha, on this parchment, a Sefer Torah would be brought out of the Mikdash for the name of God to be copied, for the parasha to be copied, and so that the Sefer Torah wouldn't be shamed or embarrassed by being brought out before a woman who is suspected by her husband of adultery. Helene Hamalka decided to donate a plaque with the same parasha written on it, so that the parchment could be written without having to bring out the Sefer Torah. Okay, so that's her second gift, connecting us to last week's parasha. And this gold plaque, right, which you would think, it's a very interesting description here. You would think that the plaque describing the sotah is something you would want to hide, something that you would want to stick into the darkest corner and keep far away. But no, this parasha was hung at the entrance to the Mikdash, שבשעה שחמה זורחת, היו ניצוצות יוצאות ממנה. When the sun shone, when the sun rose, its first light would catch the gold plaque, and a ray of light, of reflected light, would shine out from the plaque, and everybody would know that the sun had risen and that it was time for tefillah. So the shameful parashia of the sotah is transfigured by Helene's gift into a call for Am Yisrael to see that it's time to turn to God, time for tefillah. We could take this a little bit further and say that in fact Parashat Sotah is not a shameful trial, but a gift in enabling a woman to restore the trust of her husband. But we're not going to enlarge on that right now. So that's Helene's second gift. Those are Helene's two gifts: the light and the golden plaque. Coming back for a second to Josephus, and we're nearly, our time we're just about okay for time. Coming back to Josephus, Josephus tells us that at the end of her life, Helene, well, there's one more story about Helene. Let's have a look at that. Where did I put that? Here. Here we go. We can skip the gifts of the part. The Talmud tells us about the. There's some say that the rays came from the golden candlestick. Some say that it came from the golden plate. Okay. That's the Tosefta. Okay. Another place where Helene connects with last week's Pasha is the concept of the Nazir, who takes a vow to avoid impurity and to avoid alcohol for the duration of his Nazirite vow. So the Talmud in where does this appear? I don't remember where this appears. I think I actually put it. It's on the PowerPoint. Tell us that Helene took a vow as a Nazir, not to cut her hair, not to drink alcohol, not to become impure. Her son Izatis having gone to war, Helene made a vow that if she should return safe, she would become a Nazarite for the space of 7 years. She fulfilled her vow, and at the end of 7 years, went to Yehuda. So this Gemara is telling us that the occasion when Helene decided to make her pilgrimage was not just a decision, it was the end of the period of her Nazirut. The students of Hillel told her that she, having reached Yerushalayim and having kept her vow as a Nazarite outside Eretz Israel, Bet Hillel told her that she should keep her vow anew. And so she kept the conditions of Nazirut for another 7 years after her arrival in Yerushalayim. But as these 7 years drew to a close, she became ritually impure. She must have come into contact with anything from a dead mouse to a dead insect, and the whole period of 7 years Nazirut was invalid, and so she repeated the Nazirut for another 7 years, making altogether 21 years. Yehuda Bar Ilai says, no, it was only 14 years. But you can see 14 years or 21 years of Nazirut is a very substantial thing. Obviously, Helene Amalka is a very serious person. The one other story which is brought in Masechet Sukkah about Helene Amalka is that she built a sukkah in Yerushalayim, and it was higher than the maximum height for a sukkah, which is 20 amah. And even though her sukkah was larger, grander, and halachically higher than it's allowed to be, Chachmei Yerushalayim used to go in, sit in her sukkah, and keep their mouths shut, which again shows you how much respect she was held in Yerushalayim. Although, as opposed to Tzipora or the Isha Kushit from our parasha, she is also an outsider. Although she comes from far away, Helene Amalka is seen as the benefactor and a very respected personality in Yerushalayim. Let's come back to the last story of Helene. This is also brought in Josephus towards the end of his 20th book of Antiquities. It was not long ere Izatis died, when he had completed 55 years of his life and had ruled his kingdom 24 years. He left behind him 24 sons and 24 daughters, which all sounds like a typical number as opposed to an accurate number. However, he gave order that his brother, Monobazus, should succeed in the government, thereby rewarding him, because while he was himself, Izatis, absent after their father's death, Monbaz had faithfully preserved the government for him. But when Helene, his mother, heard of her son's death, she was in great heaviness, as was but natural upon her loss of such a most dutiful son. Yet it was a comfort to her that she heard the succession came to her eldest son. Accordingly, she went to him in haste. In other words, she left Yerushalayim and went back to Chadaim. And when she was come into Adiaben, she did not long outlive her son Izatis. But Monobazus sent her bones, as well as those of Izatis his brother, to Jerusalem, and gave order that they should be buried at the pyramids which their mother had erected. They were 3 in number, and distant no more than 3 furlongs from the city of Jerusalem. So, Josephus tells us that there is somewhere a monumental tomb with 3 sections to it, just outside Yerushalayim. And archaeologists in the 19th century began looking for those tombs, and they found a very impressive burial site on the hill outside Ir David. and we're going to look at that in a second, which, after it was discovered, was purchased by the French government. Sorry, was purchased by a Frenchman, and since then the French government have decided that it belongs to them. And recently, they've spent millions and millions. Jump down to, okay, restoring this site, and we're just going to look at what it looks like. Why are we not managing to jump any further down? Here, the Tomb of the Kings. So this is called the Tomb of the Kings. This was discovered in the 19th century. Possibly that peak, it has over the roof of the tomb there are peaks which might be the pyramids that Josephus is referring to. This is what it looks like, or this is what it looked like then. It was drawn by the famous travelers to Yerushalayim, the famous 19th century travelers like Wilson and Roberts. Who's etching this one is, I don't remember, I'm not sure. This is the story of Helene the Nazira. We've already talked about that. This is a later picture. This is an end of the 19th century photograph. Sorry about the letters on top of it, of the tomb, which you can see the writing that we could see pretty well in the etching. You can see it's still here. On top of the entrance, and within it were found a number of sarcophagi. One example of which was then taken to this example was taken back by the French archaeologists who excavated the site, and it's in the Louvre today. And on the side of this sarcophagus is an inscription, roughly inscribed in the stone, which says Tzidan Malkita in Aramaic. And it's thought that possibly Helene was the Greek name of the queen, and that her Aramaic name, when they spoke Aramaic in Chadaev, as well as in Eretz Yisrael, was Tzidan. And there's one more. Okay. So that's the last remnant of Helene in Yerushalayim. And as I said, recently the French government have decided to renovate, restore, and open to the public. And if you go online and you look up the Tomb of the Kings, you can actually make an appointment, as long as there are not more than 3 of you, to go and see it. It's not very accessible. There are lots of stairs, but it can be visited and it can be seen. So that is the story of Helene Hamalka, benefactor of Yerushalayim. And as we've seen, there are just many connecting factors between Helene and the story of Miriam in Parshat Beha'alotcha, and as well as in Parshat Naso and Parshat Chukat. And I just thought that it was two things that came together very nicely. In the last 2 minutes, I just want to acknowledge, first of all, that 2 more shiurim after this one.
One minute, Sara Jo, you were on mute before for a minute.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how that happened, but you were on mute.
Thank you. There are 2 more shiurim left, right, Aliza?
Yes, after today, 2 more shiurim.
After today, we have 2 more shiurim. It's incredible that considering the circumstances, we've managed to run more programs than we had originally expected to run this year. And I'm tremendously grateful to Katedra Gush Etzion, to Aliza, for the Zoom platform, for getting us all working on using it, for making so many programs available to everybody at a time when real venues have been, have not been a possibility. In view of all of that, we would like to ask you, although we know that this is not an easy time to ask for support. There are so many needs out there as a result of the coronavirus and all of us have many claims on the tzedakah that we're able to give. But nevertheless, we're asking you at the end of this year, we didn't run a fundraising campaign this year because exactly as we were planning on starting it, the coronavirus began. So we're asking everybody to make, anyone who can, some donation in recognition and to help us to continue to run the Bet Midrash programs together with Katedra. And the Katedra has discovered, just as we discovered, that running a stable program with teachers, despite tuition, doesn't cover itself. And together, the Bet Midrash and Katedra together are covering the difference. And obviously, we need your help in doing that. So anything that you can find within your ability to give to help us to secure the programs for next year, which we're going to prepare to have in Tiferet Avot, but if need be, we'll also prepare a Zoom platform, and we're hoping to provide shiurim on Zoom and at the same time. So we'll record on Zoom, so you can either participate live on Zoom, or you can be at the shiur physically, or you'll be able to listen to recordings, possibly video recordings as well as audio recordings. We need your help for all of that to be possible. So this is the information. You can donate to the Women's Bet Midrash through our website with a credit card. You can contact Aliza. All of us know how to do that. You can use the group WhatsApp. Better to WhatsApp privately to Aliza if you need to coordinate something. Every little makes a difference. If you haven't contributed to the Bet Midrash in the past couple of years because you said, oh well, Katedra are picking up the bill, this is the time to decide that yes, this program does need our support. It's a joint program. We're here we've shown that it works working together with Katedra, and we're very proud of the joint program that we've managed to run this year, and that we hope that we'll be able to bring we'll be continuing with next year as well. Okay, so that is my 2 minutes. And thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Aliza, I want to be able to say goodbye to everybody. So let's stop screen sharing.
Sara Jo?
Yeah.
Hi, I sent a message on the chat What the three gifts that presented by Helena Malka, I think you only mentioned two. What was the third gift?
There was, what did we say? We said
You said the golden light fitting, the golden tablet, and what else?
And it's not that there are three gifts, there are three sources. So there's the third is either the the third gift is the aid that she provides in the famine.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So essentially, she provides. You could even connect them to the Ananei Kavod. You could connect the light to the Ananei Kavod. You could connect the tablet, which is used for the waters of Sotah, to the Be'er, to Miriam and the Be'er, and you could connect the figs and the grain that she provides to Yerushalayim in the famine, the man that Moshe provides for Am Yisrael. So it actually fits very nicely into the Shlosha Parnasim. Thank you, Netta.
Okay, thank you. Kol hakavod.
Hi, it was really nice to see everybody's faces today. So thank you for being with us. Thank you, Aliza.
Thanks, Alisa. You're doing a great job.
Zipporah, one day we want to see your face.
My pleasure.
Fine. I have a
Oh, there you go.